If someone is suffering, I don't want to feel what it's like for them to suffer. I need to recognize that they are suffering, right? And they can tell me that, right? So it's more of a drive for someone to say, how are you feeling, right? It appears to me as though you are suffering. Is that the case? Because you never want to assume what someone's feeling. This is where empathy gets people in trouble, especially in the healthcare field, and especially with people that have a higher care drive, right? That feeling of wanting to take care of things. But desiring to be in someone else's shoes so that you can understand them better is not actually beneficial.
The following is a podcast with Caleb Greer, who is a well-respected nurse practitioner based out of Austin, Texas. In our conversation, we talk about the difference between health and healing, what spirituality means in the context of health. We talk about existentialism, absurdism, and we talk about empathy and how it is a overrated strategy for human connection. I hope you guys enjoy it. Hello everyone, I am Gage Greer, a brother of the man you all know and love, the health Sherpa, the Sherlock Holmes of patient care, Caleb Greer.
How's it going, everybody?
Yeah. We decided to do a podcast like this to go over some of the things that you've talked about in the past in previous podcasts and some of the things that you've written as well. I think first things first, we need to address some letters on the wall to my left. What may appear as hieroglyphs to some, but nonetheless, they are the symbols representing the name of your company.
Yes.
Dasein.
Right? Dasein.
So, Caleb, why Dasein?
So, I first heard about Dasein when I was listening to Jordan Peterson, a few years back, and it was kind of the unfolding of my initial clinical practice when I first started here in Austin. And when I heard him talking about it, it really resonated with me in terms of how I approach patient care as kind of a consolidation of the whole individual, moving from just a pure health-focused, physical health-focused practice to more of a amalgam of spirituality and meaning and philosophy and mental health and emotional health and ultimately where that meets the physical health. And so when it came to making it the name of the practice, obviously there's a push to be unique and have a name that kind of sticks out. And, against the better wisdom of many people, I still stuck with it because the pronunciation is so hard. But I really wanted to make a point and hit home that, it's not just another normal run-of-the-mill medical practice. So I think the name is conducive to that thought process.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, it's and it comes from Martin Heidegger's philosophy, Dasein.
Yeah, good old Germans.
It's some good ideas.
They do. That part of Eastern Europe and going into Russia too. It's also kind of the birthplace of real neurophysiology and neuroscience. Coming out of was arguably the worst time of humanity, but really the push and the space race really made them kind of at the forefront of nootropics and different tools to really assess brain function and to improve it too. So kind of a double edge there.
Yeah. So previously you just had a podcast with one of your clients, Freddie. Yeah. And it's not out yet, but I know, as being there, you mentioned health or what healing is to you. So you talked about what healing is, and is healing synonymous with health? First, I wanted to clarify that.
So no, I would say, the way that healthcare is kind of perceived currently is as something that it's something that you work towards and kind of away from sickness. And so really kind of shifting the framework of healthcare towards not just improving one's state of being, but actually kind of getting a baseline function for what is someone who's normally healthy look like, but even in that spectrum, they can be better, right? So when we think of healthcare, it's more of through the lens of what we can do to actually help someone function optimally in their day-to-day, right? And as far as their involvements go in the world. Mm-hmm. Whereas, being healthy is more so in line with what we think about in the conventional lifestyle metrics as what are you doing for nutrition? What are you doing for sleep? How are you, making your exercise work for you? How is your stress management? And then, kind of elimination and detoxification. So there's fundamental pillars of health that we look at when we talk about health.
Yeah.
But when it comes to health care, it's more about kind of walking someone through what it means to be optimal, and not just away from sickness, but kind of towards health.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess would it be fair to say like healing is kind of like this process, right? So it's the verb of health in a way. So and then health is more like the snapshot of, well, you're saying like health is a pursuit. So it's optimizing.
Yeah. So health is a pursuit, right? But healing kind of implies that there's something that you're moving away from, either a dysfunction, whether it be small or large, like an actual chronic illness, but the act of healing kind of implies that there's something to move away from. Whereas when we think about health in general, there might not be anything wrong, so there's nothing to really heal as far as there is to kind of tweak or enhance or make optimal.
Okay. So, and I think because you mentioned before that the healing is the return to all preferred states that would get all of an individual's needs met. Right. So when you're talking about the homeostatic, wanting to get to baseline on thirst, sleep, hunger, and then so that's the healing, or is that the health? Because I think he asked you what healing was, so would that be the health, and then the optimization method that you would apply to that in order to get you above baseline on those levels, that would be...
Well, so kind of taking a step back, so how I perceive healing from a fundamental perspective is really going after those homeostatic set points, right? So making sure that all of the homeostatic needs are met, right? And looking at more of the affective needs and how those are regulated too, are kind of where the distinction is separated between how I approach healthcare. Because a lot of people might be optimal in terms of their physical health, but actually still need a lot of emotional support or kind of guidance in how they deal with negative emotion, how they deal with the different ways that stressors are implicated in their daily lives. So at the basis, right, we've got the homeostatic needs that need to be regulated as far as fluid osmolarity and balance, and then hunger and thirst and temperature regulation, all the things that we kind of prefer as humans to be happy, right, in terms of our physiology. Beyond that, we've got the emotional needs as far as being cared for and having our attachments, right? So that's a big piece, having our fear managed, having our sadness and grief and all those things integrated in a way that doesn't get in the way of where we ultimately want to be, which is in pursuit of meaning and, for lack of a better word, happy.
Gotcha. No, and I think that gets more into, because when I heard it before, it sounded that fundamental pursuit of what healing was, it sounded kind of pre-Dasein, because there is a component that I know you've touched on before, but you didn't kind of get into there, or what I felt was lacking was the component of spirituality. And I know that's kind of gets into the meaning aspect of things. So before I'll let you get into that, I kind of want to first have you define what spirituality is, because that is a can of worms in and of itself. It's kind of like a moving target of definitions, because there's so many different various ways to define and talk about spirituality. So I'll have you define what spirituality is, and then how that applies to health, and then how do you integrate that into your health practice?
Sure. Okay, yeah. So untangling that is going to be a journey. So for me personally, what it means to be spiritual and kind of divorce it from the conventional religious aspect of what spirituality means, to me, spirituality is to tap into kind of the universal source of what makes us conscious. And I think, kind of going into, statistically and mechanistically what that means from how the brain is actually able to manifest consciousness is one avenue of this argument. But really going into the fact that at the core, really all we are is energy. And so to kind of take that from this woo spectrum of what it means to say we're made of energy, right? But ultimately, every atom and all the subatomics are kind of geared by how they resonate and how the frequencies are generated from the interactions with each other. And so, as humans and mammals and all the other animals kind of combined, even plant life, we all have this kind of underlying theme that we're all made of the same stuff. And so I think a lot of people can grow to appreciate that if we all kind of remove this humanistic side, that we are kind of better than everything else around us that's not human, right? That we have something that gives us an edge over all other organisms, living and non-living, that it gives us kind of it gives us a better way to see ourselves in lieu of the whole picture. And it kind of helps people understand that we are more than just an individual, that we're part of this whole collective. And I think tapping into our universality is where the spiritual really comes to manifest. Now that might mean that we have an anthropomorphization of what that is, whether it be God or some kind of deity or something that explains how we're all universally connected. But at the base of it, really, it's the fact that energy is conglomerated in form, and then in that form we have embodied action, and then with that action we have involvement with how that form is manifest. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's hard for people to grasp on this level of analysis in the way that we live in our just regular playing field, because we don't really come into contact with that kind of transcendence to experience that there is this unity in energy among all things, and to have that understanding. It doesn't really like make contact with everyday experience. It does. I mean, like, you know, about psychedelic experience and those rare experiences that you do kind of get a glimpse into that. But when you're looking at wanting to integrate into healthcare, what does that look like like spiritually? If you're wanting to say that yes, spirituality is something that we want to have a component, is a component of health, and I guess it is that. I guess say more to that. So
how do we integrate that form, that?
Yeah, your understanding of the transcendent. How are you wanting to apply that into healthcare itself?
So it's kind of under the table, honestly. So for most people, like you said, having that conversation, number one, is too difficult to have like in a meaningful setting within, you know, the kind of time frame that we're allowed to talk about. But where it starts to kind of rear its head is when people are engaging in the mental health side of the practice, and we're talking on a deeper level about, you know, either trauma or explaining, you know, the existential nature of grief and of death and of very meaningful things that, you know, in our society we kind of put on the afterthought until something happens, right? And so part of the practice is really forecasting the potential for things that might perturb our well-being, right? And so for most people that comes in the form of, you know, losing things that we love, right? Having grief, and whether that loss is personal, right? As far as losing your innocence, you know, someone who gets raped at a very young age or molested by a family member, right? There's betrayal involved, and there's loss of, you know, a sense of innocence with those things. And until people really grasp that, you know, there's nothing that's really their fault in terms of that, and kind of having a reanalysis of their narratives to give credence to the fact that in the big picture, we're all kind of the same. And, you know, part of what we do in this nature of unfolding is kind of figure out what people's value structures and belief structures are around why things happen the way they do, you know, who's causal in that process, and really kind of picking apart how the narrative unfolds and how the brain is actually trying to explain through the lens of, you know, best practices for that individual, how to explain why the world is the way it is. And so really kind of picking that apart and saying, well, look, you know, this event happened, right? What did you extract from that? How did your defense mechanisms pop up? How are your perceptions of safety changed? And how do you take that and kind of move forward? Helping them understand that, you know, this concept of free will may or may not be in their vernacular, but kind of picking apart where it actually does pop up and how they believe that they're conscious agents moving forward. And again, moving that through the lens of, you know, as living individuals, we all are made of the same stuff. What makes one person act in a certain way and one person act in a different way? What makes one person respond to a stressor or a scenario one way, and what makes another person respond in a different way? And so that's really where the spiritual undertones kind of come out, and it's nothing that we really brute force in the beginning, but it's just kind of dropping small nuggets on how to reframe someone's being through this lens of we are all this kind of, I would say stardust, but we're all this kind of source, that we're all made from this source, this original code of what it means to be alive, and how we can kind of tease that apart and be reverent to that in terms of having compassion for, all kinds of people, all kinds of animals, all kinds of beings. And that almost puts you in this this mind space of thinking of other over thinking of self, and just moving from that locus of self to locus of other can really help actually make you a better human being and make you understand things through the lens of other people's perceptions, albeit not in an empathetic sense, as you're not feeling what they're feeling, but you can feel that there is something that it's like to be that person, and there is something that's like to be your person. And as much as you can try to use language and communication to bridge those gaps, you can be as close to understanding the individual as they will let you understand.
Gotcha. So and you don't really have like a metric. So it doesn't really sound like you have a metric of when you're like all these other things where, and I know you're very metric centered in your health approach.
Yeah.
It's just like, here's your blood test exam, here's your levels, yada, yada, yada. We're going to see you in 3 months and see how you improve. So there's not an equivalent of that to your spirituality where like you're making an assessment, here's the metrics, we're going to see how you improve on a spiritual level, in 3 months or so. That's a little bit harder to assess.
It is. Hopefully, in the next few months, we're integrating more quantitative EEG analysis, and so we'll actually be able to kind of on a network level assess how involved someone is with self-referential thought and how involved someone is with other-centered thought. So looking at kind of brain maps of meditators and people that have a lot of experience kind of focusing on detachment or different things that kind of help alleviate negative emotion, and kind of see what their brain states look like in a general setting, and then try to mimic that with therapies or whatever it might be to change how someone thinks and the thought processes they have and how it changes their brain structure. And from the bottom up, right, from the brainstem generating affect in general, how someone continuously perceives the world, and then how they change their narrative depending on how they see the world. So it's actually changing who's in the driver's seat of consciousness and what to pay attention to. And it's not voluntary, it's a reflexive thing, right? So as things pop up in accordance with how you value and how you differentiate what to pay attention to, if you get your brain to actually pay attention to things that you want and pay attention to things that are going to be good for you, assuming you know what's good for you, right?
Yeah.
That's a bigger issue. So hopefully we'll have better metrics to track what it means to be spiritual, as far as having compassion and thinking about the universal nature of being.
Yeah.
But for now, we just have how people actually report perceiving the world differently.
Spirituality, it feels like it's almost, I want to say it's monopolized in a way, in terms there. So you're either religious, and that's how you kind of interpret meaning and the things around you, or you're spiritual. But I feel like if you're not religious, then the only option that you have is to say you're spiritual. But I was doing some research, and there's actually been some other practices that have been introducing existentialism as a dimension into how we can interpret meaning and purpose and the things that unfold around us as an alternative. But what I thought was attractive, and I think that can actually be a better replacement for spirituality for some folks who don't really see the spiritual, or like to see it's not a preferred framework to interpret reality, where existentialism can actually serve as an alternative for, again, those people. And I'll lay the groundwork real quick, because I know that some people haven't really heard existentialism, and if they had, they know kind of what it is, but not really so much. But existentialism,
It's a sexy word.
Yeah, it does have this kind of sex, I feel like. But existentialism basically is any logical or literary exploration of the basic human condition, of what it means to fundamentally be a person. So, and that's all the way from Dostoevsky, kind of type of writing, through phenomenologists like Heidegger.
Yeah.
And it's again attributing to existentialism as a whole, but that was phenomenology. Why I think that is a better option for some. Again, I'm not saying that we can shun spirituality completely, but what existentialism is a more neutral term of seeing the world. Like it's a framework of perception that comes with a less commitment to belief. Because I guess when I say existentialism, when you tell me about your experience, if I had an existentialist framework, existentialism would say, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting data point in your memory bank, you know. Whereas spirituality would be like, oh, that's interesting. But not only is that interesting, but let's make a belief system out of it. So it's you going on an ayahuasca journey, seeing a divine figure, and on the other end, you know, claiming that there's past lives.
Yeah.
Or, you know, giving more credence to how you see your tarot card reading.
Yeah. Developing story out of the event itself rather than just having the event as an event.
Exactly. Yeah. So because spirituality has that baggage because it's networked with all these different kind of symbols and how you're supposed to, again, these practices and how you're kind of supposed to, the woo, as you said before. So existentialism, again, would be more of that, just clearing that playing field a little bit, neutralizing that, and moving forward. One of the ways that it does that, and so there's existentialism, but then there's kind of, okay, so then I'll get into like more of kind of what it does, just for the sake of an example. So there is absurdism, and that's kind of like it's a way of humorizing life.
Yeah.
So, brief background: absurdism came from the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. That was developed into this more sophisticated philosophy by Albert Camus. And absurdism is this dramatic, grand mismatch between your belief intentions and what you think is all important and the actual state of affairs, what happens to be the case. So an example of this is, I know you've seen this movie, but The Other Guys, yeah. So you got these two officers in the very beginning. You have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Samuel L. Jackson, right? And they're at the top of the building and they jump off into their death.
Aim for the bushes.
So it's funny in and of itself on that own that they just fall off and they die. But what makes it funnier than that is that there's that absurd aspect of it. It's what they said prior to jumping off that reflects their belief, which is what you said. It just came to you. Aim for the bushes, because that was the funniest thing. Because here's the absurd, right? It's their belief that there are bushes at the bottom that can cushion the fall of falling from 12 feet, and the actual state of affairs, which is not only are there not bushes down there that can cushion your blow if there were, but there weren't any in sight, right? There were no fucking bushes in that scene.
It's concrete.
And it was just all concrete. So that's absurd, and absurd is humor, and absurd, that's life, dude.
Well, and because this is the coffee example, right? This is the guy that wrote about the cup of coffee. Share that example, because I think it's a more poignant and more simple example. Like if no one's seen The Other Guys, so actually walk through that one.
So talking about suicide. So he was saying, should I have a cup of coffee, or should I have? And some people say that this quote isn't really attributed to him, but just for the sake of the argument, he said that should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? And the idea is to focus on the simple things in life, just whatever you find pleasure in your immediate surroundings, and let that motivate you and push you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to gain momentum towards life. And it's not really focusing on an idea of in the future of what you want to do, because it's so hard and removed from our immediate experience that it's not tangible enough. And so when you're talking to like a really depressed person who can't get out of bed, you just say, just think about your dreams, dude. It's way too far away. Like,
Yeah.
focus just on sitting
Proximate.
up. You know, get the dopamine surging through just sitting up. Really, putting your feet on the ground. You know, looking at the coffee bag. It's just like maybe that'll, you know, maybe that's better than committing suicide. So it's just a very minimalistic approach to moving on. Which that's not really the absurd. That's kind of a different stream of his line of thought. But the absurd, what I was getting at is, so kind of laying out what the absurd is again this dramatic mismatch between our beliefs and what the actual state of affairs is. And I mean, what we can do is just reflect on that more and allow that to develop this sense of humor about life. Because like we're here, sitting around cameras, like talking through our mouth holes, trying to make sense of what each other are doing, and just like it's kind of funny. Like this is like, and then this is all we go to work 9 to 5 to have nice boxes to live in, to drive nice boxes to go to work, and it's just that's because we think that is all important, and that's what we live life for so many of us, and the fact that the cosmos is so indifferent to that mismatch between our drive to extract meaning out of life and the fact that there is inherently no meaning in the universe is hilarious.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot more sense in terms of like looking at being through the lens of just what actually matters in terms of our proximal involvements and kind of what it means. Obviously, this is where the spiritual and religious kind of have a different take, because there's a transcendence beyond our existence here on this plane, right? And so even for people that think that, you know, our energy will be either reincarnated in a different being or recycled into some other life force, even if it's not alive, but there's a degree of thinking behind that mode that, you know, what we have now is not the end, you know, and for you and I, and I think, you know, a lot of people out there, there is kind of a difficulty to find meaning if that meaning is confined to our short lifespan, right? And this is where people have the augment of legacy and moving on through your child's or your children's lives or through your impact on other people, right? So even though our absurd, you know, existence might just be for a short period of time, it doesn't mean that we can't impact how life unfolds moving forward. And I think this kind of gets back to diving into existentialism as somewhat of a belief structure, or as a kind of theory behind how to be, to explain our existence through the lens of the most fundamental meaning, which would be, you know, at least what I think is to reduce suffering, right? And so at the minimum, and, you know, Jordan Peterson says a lot, right? It's not a zero-sum game, right? If we just sit, you know, we can't avoid death, we can't avoid pain, we can't avoid feeling discomfort, right? If our bladder gets full or our bowels get full, we're gonna have to go evacuate, or else it's gonna be a bad situation.
Gonna have a bad time.
And so ultimately that kind of goes back to, again, the homeostatic needs, and it goes back to what it means to even feel the euphoria of pursuing something of meaning, whether it means go to the bathroom, right? So ultimately, you know, the discomfort of that homeostatic gauge of urine filling means go do something about it. And it's that valuative property of feelings that drives consciousness in the first place. So, you know, for us as, you know, somewhat conscious agents in this world, we're able to pursue things of meaning because we feel a certain way about them. And ultimately, you know, in our society, we have this conscientious nature to not just solve for things in the here and now, but actually to solve things best or better in the future, right? And that's where our actual pursuit of future engagements, even if they may or may not exist in our lifetimes, that's where that actually gets ingrained.
Yeah. It's bottom up in that way.
Yeah, so once we kind of have all those needs met, we can actually think about how to get those needs met, not in the here and now, but actually for longevity, right? It's the same that, you know, ants store food for different seasons, right? They're not just working for the here and now. You know, squirrels store nuts for a future time. You know, there's all these different foraging activities for food survival that have actually impacted the conscious agency of lower mammals, we'll say, right? So there isn't just a reflexive memory process. There's not just an ingrained, evolutionary passing down of this information. It's actually they're motivated neurochemically and neurologically to go and pursue things over time to make sure that their survival is actually guaranteed to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I'm with you. I think it's and I think we can approach that pursuit of meaning, like you said, like through a spiritual lens. But I think there's also room to have like more of that neutral existential lens, as like how you in your framework as a holistic practice, right? So it's a grab bag of things, and we're trying to it's an integrative process. And so I think that we also need to have that in the meaning department of multiple ways of understanding the world around us and generating meaning and creating those stories and narratives in our head. And it was just it was interesting for me to see like how existentialism was on the table as a way to perceive the world. And I just wanted to see what you thought about that and how.
Yeah, I mean, even to piggyback how phenomenology grew out of existentialism, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of take fundamental.
No, phenomenology grew into existentialism.
Oh, okay. Well, so even to kind of take it back and say that what matters most is how an individual is actually existing, right? When push comes to shove, a person is not generally worried about other people. It's about themselves and how they experience the world, right? So from a phenomenological perspective, it's like what is happening to me, and what is happening to me is happening. And so for me, from a mental health and emotional health and a spiritual health perspective in practice, it is about kind of evaluating and listening to how people perceive the world. And I talk about this in my newsletter about what is Dasein, but ultimately, reducing suffering in the here and now is one of the most important tenets. And then listening to an individual will help you understand how they perceive the world and what their interpretive structure really is. And so if you can get by their behaviors and by what they're telling you and by what their explicit stated beliefs are, how concordant are those three things, right? Are they behaving in a way that's going to get them what they want, or are they behaving in a way that's interfering with getting what they want? Right, so having those conversations and really kind of picking apart, okay, you believe this and you value this, but you're doing this, right? Do you see how those are not congruent? And then kind of figuring out, well, okay, I see that, right? What I'm doing is not helping. Where did I get these belief structures that aren't helping, and how can I actually go back in time and unravel those and change how I perceive the world moving forward as a grown adult? And, finding purpose as an adult is so hard for so many people because they've already kind of committed their whole life to a certain degree to what they're already doing. So if they get to a certain point, whether it's a high-powered position, whether they're a lawyer or a doctor or some other position of power or authority, many, many people get stuck by realizing that once they've achieved what they thought would bring them meaning and happiness and pleasure, it doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? And so helping them kind of untangle, well, what did you actually want to do? What drove you as a child? What motivated you? What did you want to be as a kid? And kind of picking apart their fundamental qualities that they either sold out on or bought into somebody else's dream for what it meant to be successful as a human. By and large, most people do recognize that where they find meaning is helping other people. Right? There's an altruistic nature of humanity that is involved with feeling better by helping other people feel better. And so finding out how people can do that in the here and now is a very difficult process that people really don't have the strategies to exploit.
Yeah, especially as things are becoming more digital and more individualistic.
Yeah.
In a lot of different ways.
And also just disingenuous. I mean, a lot of people aim to help people, but they do so for a personal credit, right? So it's not actually altruistic in the sense that they're doing something to alleviate someone else's suffering purely to alleviate that person's suffering.
Right.
Right. And I see this in the healthcare field all the time where, people talk a big game as far as like what they're doing for people, but then you see, what's actually happening in the individual they're concerning themselves with, is not doing, any better, right? They could be on 20 different medications or supplements and think that they're on the way to healing, but really they're just doing things, right? They're not actually doing the work internally to change the representation of how they perceive the world, how they perceive meaning. They're just doing things on top physically to make it seem like they're actually getting some kind of return on investment. But it's not, it's something so much more deep, and that's why I transitioned from just doing this physical health care to integrating the other pieces that make someone a well-rounded individual and making being so much more meaningful in general.
Yeah. That's what you're saying. I know you've talked about, in the dichotomy of, in the paper you wrote, it was an article, there was the dichotomy of pharmaceuticals and what's natural, right? And what you kind of point out is, you kind of call out people and saying, basically, know why you believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're not doing that, you're essentially committing philosophical suicide. It's not knowing why you believe what you would believe. But what if what you believe is making you healthier on a meaning level? So like on the narrative space, in the spiritual space, if what you believe is actually, psychologically supporting you to live another day, even though that maybe that's not the truest thing, there's kind of a catch-22 because you're caught between, okay, well, I want you to live a healthier life, and this is for you continuing to believe in this, that is the healthiest thing that you can probably do.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's just like knowing why you believe what you believe would shatter that into this kind of uncertainty about things, which is also another kind of thing with existentialism. It tears apart the certainty of your beliefs and allowing you to live in this open space of anything could be really on the table in terms of.
Yeah. So I have I have a point to never shake someone's axioms to the degree that they can't scaffold it in the meantime and support at the same time. So if someone comes in with a belief structure that's helping them to some degree, but it's not either the most helpful, or it's kind of an opportunity cost where they might be spending too much money, for example, on things that are helping them feel better, that could be diverted to a different resource that might easily make them feel as good but save a little bit more money. So as a financial example, there's one. But in terms of like belief structures, like, a lot of discussions around free will, for the health and benefit of people's well-being, that's a big one. And in terms of, again, just focusing on outcome, having people perform an exercise of, forecasting, like where do you want to be in 5 years? How do you see yourself getting there? What is helping you get there? And what's going to be impeding your progress towards that goal? That's one of the easiest things to help people understand. They don't know what the hell they're doing, right? There's no consciousness actually involved. They're not, I hate to use the word woke, but they're just not awake, right? They're living day to day in terms of what they think they're going to do in 5 years, but explicitly, they have no target that they're aiming at, and they don't have a plan on how to get there. A lot of kids in college have this, and it's actually a great scaffold because they know in 4 years I'm going to graduate. And then it gets a little bit murkier, right? I'm going to get a job. Well, what kind of job?
Yeah.
Where? Are you going to relocate? Are you going to be in the same place? How are you going to pay off your loans? What does that look like? Right? So there's a lot of different questions that they have a broad target, but if you imagine like how many deviations of targets are on like a bullseye board, right? There's 100, right? So if you're just kind of shooting blanks at a board, you're probably going to miss. Now you'll land on the board if you've got one, but it could be further away from where you would like to be in 5 years. So kind of laying out that forecasting is a big part of it that will kind of expose their own belief systems to where it's on them and it's not me showing them, right? It's kind of helping poke holes in their axioms, but they're the ones that are doing the poking, right? I just kind of lay out the picture, and by them looking at the full picture for once in their lives, they're able to kind of see, oh yeah, I didn't really think about this. I didn't think about this. I didn't think about this. Really, I don't think about why I pursued this whole thing to begin with. So when it comes to, the dichotomy between how people make decisions that might be good for them versus best for them, I'm never going to just shock people ontologically and say, look, you're doing everything wrong, right? And here's why you're doing everything wrong. And here's all the things I can point out that you're doing things wrong, right? That's not a good way to actually expose someone's axioms, right? And so you want to put it in their court. Using data is a great way to say, look, this is what your blood work looks like. This is what your, breath analysis looks like. This is what your body analysis looks like. You can say all day long that you're fit and healthy and happy, but if you've got a visceral fat of 3 pounds, like, it's going to kill you before you even recognize it. So data-driven analysis is one way to help people understand that, okay, what I'm doing is not the best way to do it.
Right.
It's not a slap on the hand to say what you're doing is wrong. It's just saying what you've done up to this point has gotten to this point.
Yeah.
But where you want to go from this point, right? You wouldn't be here if you were happy with where you're at.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I mean, it's a very gentle poking and prodding process.
Yeah. And I see where it's easy, where there's metrics that you can track. But in terms of like the narrative that you build, like when you're in the meaning and purpose department, it's a little bit murkier for how to navigate.
And that's where the past authoring exercise comes in super handy, because then you can have someone's own re-narrativizing of a history that they've had that they probably haven't thought about in a very long time. So as they lay out the past that's gotten them to the present, they will be the ones to say, all right, that event had a little bit more significance that I gave it credit for, or this event kind of made me really emotional when I thought about it again. And so kind of picking those things out and seeing where there were problems earlier on that then manifested in how that person interprets the world and what they will value accordingly afterwards, that is a gentle way to help them self-expose. So I'm not telling them and building up this psychological paradox of if you tell someone what they're doing wrong, they're going to double down, cognitive bias is going to kick in, and they're going to say, no, I'm doing it right. This is okay for me.
Yeah.
Right? Once they are the ones that actually elicit the doubt, then the uncertainty in their mind opens up, and then you can kind of, this is where psychedelics really come and help and dissolve the ownership of that narrative and say, that narrative wasn't yours to begin with. It's okay to dispose of it, right? The mistakes were made, but not necessarily by them. And so now they can say, all right, well, it wasn't my fault. These were the cards that I were dealt. This is what I did with them. This is how I played it. But that doesn't mean that I can't reshuffle my deck, draw a new hand, and then play it differently.
Yeah, introducing rare candies into your life.
Yeah, the rare candies.
Yeah,
as long as you're still doing the work, right? I mean, that's where the premise of the rare candy kind of comes into play. So this is a concept that comes from Pokemon, and it's the utilization of a product basically that raises the level of your little monster by 1, right? And so where this can kind of bite people in the butt if they're not doing the work around training, so to speak, is they're actually going to get to a place that's artificial rather than augmented, right? So you don't want to get to a place where, for example, you're just using anabolic steroids to grow a bunch of muscle mass and get really strong, but you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, because that's not actually what you would have done, or you're not actually maintaining that program in the meantime. Now, if you've got someone, that let's just use jiu-jitsu, for example, right? If you've got someone who's rolling 5 to 6, days per week, 2 or 3 different rolls, per session, they're training, they're doing their cardio stuff, they're doing their swimming, they're doing their resistance training. That's actually a strategy that's great for a couple years, but it's not maintainable into the future. So once they have this great discipline and support structure and belief system around training, what it means to really be disciplined and do work, that's where you can actually throw in the rare candies and say, look, let's support your physiology to do this long term. So you're not injuring yourself, you're not overtraining, you're not damaging your adrenal production, you're not ruining your sleep. You have the discipline, you have the foundations, you have the skill set. Now let's actually peel back on the overtraining, help yourself recover better so your longevity in the sport is increased, and use rare candies to augment their physiology so they keep it without having to do the same kind of damage to their body.
I'm thinking the ARX machines are great rare candies.
Oh yeah. But even in that sense, like it's It is kind of a hack, but it's also something that still requires as much work as you can put into it.
Well, that's what I thought. The rare candies are a kind of shortcut to meeting a goal.
Yeah, I mean,
So like
essentially.
you're still doing the work, and so but it's just allowing you to do the work for half the amount of time, you know, in order to get where you want to be. But you're still like putting in the work. Like you're still going to those 30-minute sessions, but it's just the output is just as much as you would if you were doing 5 times a day, an hour each day.
Sure. I mean, I would say, if we're going to kind of use that as a rare candy, that really anything you do that's not in your day-to-day life is kind of a rare candy. So like doing sprints on a bike would somewhat be a rare candy, because you're not going to go run down an animal for food anymore, right? So there's really no purpose to doing those things outside of just improving your health in the short term and for longevity. Going to the gym and lifting weights, like that's still somewhat of a rare candy. Like you're doing something to augment the normal status of a human that's not in the day-to-day requirements of what you need to do.
Yeah. I was thinking of it in the grand scope of things, because it allows me more time to do something else, right?
Yeah, that's
And
opportunity cost, right? What am I missing out on by not doing this or by doing this?
Right. A few things I kind of want to talk to you about. And I noticed you kind of veer away from empathy. And you use compassion. Now, we've talked about this previously, about the concept of empathy and how, or the lack thereof that you have for your clients. So how do you understand empathy in a client setting, or just in a basic human-to-human interaction? How do you employ empathy or not?
Yeah, so, for me, empathy is kind of a dirty word. I think it has a lot of baggage. And so really, first operationally, to just kind of define empathy and how I see it as an evolutionary conserved mechanism for the maternal instinct, right? So in the case where we cannot communicate verbally with language with another being, we can use the connection, especially one as so strong as a mother-infant dyad, to otherwise assume how the individual is feeling. So this is actually where you do put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? You do kind of want to feel what your infant is feeling in order to kind of give them what they actually need, right? So it's interpreting their cry, it's interpreting their smells, right? Their pheromones, their different, the aspects of their physiology that help the mother empathize with the infant to get its needs met. In adult life, it's kind of something that should develop into an altruistic compassion, right? So it's something that, if someone is suffering, I don't want to feel what it's like for them to suffer. I need to recognize that they are suffering, right? And they can tell me that, right? So it's more of a drive for someone to say, how are you feeling, right? It appears to me as though you are suffering. Is that the case? Because you never want to assume what someone's feeling. This is where empathy gets people in trouble, especially in the healthcare field, and especially with people that have a higher care drive, right? That feeling of wanting to take care of things, which is classically maternal. But desiring to be in someone else's shoes so that you can understand them better is not actually beneficial, right? Because what it does is actually, it's an emotional contagion, right? So if someone is feeling a certain way and then all of a sudden you feel a certain way, that's actually not being conscious of your own mind and how you're interpreting your environment. So being sensitive to someone else's feelings can be okay if you can actually transform it into compassion rather than get sucked into how they're feeling, right? No one wants to feel like what it feels like to be taken advantage of or molested, as someone would tell you, right? But what it's helpful to do is take how they're explaining what they feel like and saying, sounds like that's very difficult. I appreciate you telling me this. And where do you want to be with this narrative, in the next 2 weeks, in the next month, in the next year? Is it something that they want to keep themselves wrapped up in? Usually the answer is no, right? So it really does me as a provider, first and foremost, no good to put myself in their shoes, right? Because that will actually make me less objective about what I'm trying to help them get across. So I want to stay as objective as possible in an interaction, understand what people are feeling by them telling me how they're feeling to the best degree that they can. Mm-hmm. And then taking that and saying, well, here's how you're feeling. How do you want to feel? Like, what is an ideal state of being for your emotional, apparatus? And, no one's going to tell me I want to be sad for the rest of my life, right? No one's going to tell me I want to be depressed and amotivated for the rest of my life, mm-hmm. right? I don't want to feel depressed and amotivated. So if that person is feeling depressed and amotivated, that doesn't help me get them out of bed and doing something they love.
Yeah, and it's also, so I see it sounds like a bad strategy. Not only is it a bad strategy, but it's basically a non-starter for human connectivity and communication.
Yeah.
Because in communicating what you feel to someone, or expecting someone to empathize with you, in other words, to expect you to imagine yourself in my shoes and to feel what I feel, or to imagine yourself as such feeling what I feel, mm-hmm. that's an impossible task, right? I mean, because you're probably the one person that I could probably get the closest I could with any other person, because we have basically the same history, or we have basically the same genes.
Yeah.
We grew up together, same experiences, same parents. So between you and me, I have the best shot of having the most empathetic resonance with you.
Yep.
But when we're talking about non-family, just outside and just people, especially if it's international with different cultures, I am not going to understand. If I try to empathize with you, I'm going to be so off the mark that it's just not going to map onto your reality. I'm going to be still wrong. An example kind of came up. It's funny. I was with a friend, and she was telling me how she was telling me about her friend, her best friend, how she broke ties with her. And immediately I really just felt pretty emotional. Mm-hmm. I was like imagining myself as if my friend cut off a relationship that we've had for so long together, just for personal reasons, and kind of started to choke up a little bit. And I was like, and I don't think she even knew it at the time, like it hit me that much, but I was like, well, damn, this is like this feels like me being empathetic. And I naturally, I just put my hand around her. I'm like, I'm sorry, like you must be in such grief. And she's like, no, it's kind of it's fine. Like, it's just, it's actually for the better, because she wasn't really that supportive as a friend. And I'm kind of a better person with her out. So in the long run, it'll be better for me. And when she told me that, I was like kind of deflated. I was like, oh, well, I was fucking wrong to feel this way.
Yeah.
Because even if she did, so say maybe she did have a grief process in the very beginning, but I'm playing catch up in that way. So I'm feeling what she probably felt maybe at the very beginning of when that happened. So it's not really feeling what she's feeling in that moment, because I am, again, starting where she had initially started from at that initial breakup. So it's just like, I don't see the utility in that at all.
Yeah. Well, and initially, like there is somewhat of utility in just exposing yourself to existential problems, right?
Sure.
Losing friends is an existential problem that maybe you hadn't thought about before, not you in particular, but as a person. So there is somewhat of a good exercise for, this is the same as, premeditatio malorum, like just meditating on the possibilities of evil. In the same sense, like, some people don't think about losing a brother or losing a friend, right? And so for some people, that challenge of someone else's experience can help you think about, well, if that did happen to me, how would I feel? But that's still not feeling what they felt.
Exactly.
Right? So appreciating the difference between, if I lost a friend, I would be pretty grieved, right? But let me actually check in with this person and ask how they're dealing with it. Because you're right, if you project on to how you would feel in their situation without actually asking them how they felt in the situation, your intuition is dead ass wrong.
Yeah.
And so not only could you, help yourself by not doing that, but you might also, depending on the neuroticism of that individual, put them backwards in their relationship with how they perceive the outcome. So if you're saying, oh man, that's I'm so sorry, that must be really hard, blah blah blah, they could actually say, oh, yeah, I guess it is kind of worse than I thought it'd be, right? Their coping strategy to actually be resilient might be shorthanded by your babying and coddling of how they should actually feel if they were you.
Right.
And so that's what I never want to do as an individual, trying to get them out of funk and into resilience.
Right.
So that was a perfect example.
Yeah. No, it's it's not a popular opinion because we're told, especially so much more in this culture, to empathize. Like it's even invaded like the business, and like in certain departments like UX, UI designing and business modeling, Aries, to empathize with like users, to try to experience what they're experiencing. But it's so funny because they're taught not to. Because it's just kind of like how you pointed out, people don't know sometimes what they believe, or they don't know what they believe, and they also don't know what they want. So like when they're navigating, say it's an interface task of putting an item in the shopping basket. And so this is a UX researcher watching this, and they do the task and they conclude, oh, that was great, I really enjoyed it. Like that was a very simple, very easy, user-friendly design. I did that pretty well. But you, as the trained researcher, noticed that there was some lag in how you did that. There was too many pauses, and you record that. So despite what they felt, their experience, where things can be improved upon. So, I mean, all that to say is just, I think we overemphasize empathy in a lot of ways, and it's just a bad language game in some respects.
Yeah, and I think it's not even that. I think when people hear that conversation we just had, it makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
That we're not trying to do away with this process of trying to figure out what another human is feeling. Right. This problem of other minds will always be in the way, and I think that problem is actually what helps us say, there's no way in hell I'm ever going to feel what someone else is feeling, so I'm not even going to try. Right? I'm going to use the tool of language to actually ascertain, dude, what are you feeling? Right, Aries, calm down. So in terms of discarding empathy as a proto compassion, like I think that's a more helpful distinction, right? So, and even the studies that look at compassion versus empathy, you can actually see changes in people's brains when they think about compassion and helping someone through their suffering versus empathetic training, which is more on the lines of feeling what someone else is feeling. You get different activations in different parts of the brain that are associated with long-term outcomes of depression and negative emotion versus positive emotion and altruistic behavior.
Right.
And so the deviation right there is very clear literature-wise, that what we should be aiming for is not empathy, but compassion.
And I'll include those research papers in the show notes so that y'all can reference. But yeah, the basic compassion training is just as you said, it promotes this positive emotion, and that's through loving kindness training, through that kind of practice of, I think it's just called loving kindness. Yeah. And then the opposite of that, empathizing. The practice of empathizing was actually making people, it was arousing more negative emotion in individuals. So, it's interesting studies. I think that's basically...
Is that a wrap?
That's basically everything that we set out to talk about. It's been a little over an hour, so...
Cool.
If I don't know if you want to have any closing words on...
No, I think, the gist of it, and what boils down to what Dasein really means is to, evaluate your past, integrate it into your present, and then really plan on how that's going to look into the future. And all aspects of physiology, from how you perceive the world, how you feel the world, and how you value things in the world, will manifest, differently according to what those line up with how you want to be in the future. There's plenty of tools to kind of identify the locuses of concern, But at the end of the day, it's really, is what you're doing working for you, or is it not? And if it's not, what are you going to do about it?
Dasein, ladies and gentlemen.